The Formula One World Championship is brought to you on Eurosport by Ford, Formula One's most successful team. Hitachi. Elf Oil, World Champion. Coca-Cola. And Goodyear.
Hello and welcome here on Eurosport. Hello and welcome for the warm-up for the second Grand Prix of the 1994 Grand Prix season. The Pacific Grand Prix from the Tanaka International Racetrack, Aida, Japan. And, well, John, good morning, but there's a Japanese hero.
Mr. Katayama, I'm sure will have a few butterflies in his stomach if this is going to be a Grand Prix. Well, not quite his home Grand Prix, but it is in his homeland. The inaugural Pacific Grand Prix from Tanaka International. And Eric Comas, the man who had everybody rocking on their heels on Friday morning in the on-time session, when he in fact was third quickest. And now Senna preparing to get into either the spare or his prime race car. Man who of course took pole position on Friday, didn't really have to defend it on Saturday. Track conditions were quite a lot hotter, and in general the improvements were very few, and the front row of the grid in fact was never under threat.
And there we see the Rothmans Williams team getting their cars ready to go out during the morning warm-up. And there's Eric Comas, and John still wearing his sunglasses, a man who showed a lot of promise on Friday morning but couldn't really capitalize on it.
Well, the field now streaming out, and this is, well, there's going to be another session really, I think, about learning. Teams still undecided, and looking at the number of teams coming out with what I would describe as bedded-in tyres or run tyres. The two Jordans, of course, they didn't run a great deal on Saturday afternoon, and they retained some fresh sets of tyres, some unused sets, and they're going out on a set apiece. McLaren, of course, the other team that looked after its allocation of 7 sets of tyres very carefully indeed, and in the words of Ron Dennis, we are now into environmental issues. Conservation of rubber was their prime objective on Saturday afternoon. It may well pay major dividends for the McLaren team in a few hours' time.
The McLaren team that qualified in 4th and 6th positions, Mika Häkkinen on the 2nd row and Martin Brundle on the 3rd row, while there we see Damon Hill and Mika Häkkinen leaving the pits. Pole position for Ayrton Senna, alongside him Michael Schumacher. That's the front row in Japan, as it was in Brazil. And then Senna was leading the race, and John, with overtaking near impossible on this racetrack, strategy is the key.
Well, I think pit stops and how you have used your tyres over certainly the 2 official days of practicing and qualifying. More importantly, how you determine what is the best way for your either 2 cars, or I think in fact we're going to see a number of teams varying their own strategies. They may go for 2 stops, other teams may have 3 stops. It's really a question, I think, of what is found out this morning, because to some extent most teams will be running now with something like 1/3 fuel capacity, somewhere around 70 litres, and it may be the first time they've had that amount of fuel in the car. And the only problem, Allard, I see is that running in the morning as we are, it is early here in Japan. Of course, the ambient temperature very much lower, and it's very easy to kid yourself into believing that you've found the solution to problems. Now, if you look back to Saturday qualifying, we saw the unusual sight of 2 Williams cars spinning, in fact, at an identical part of the circuit. That's Revolver Corner. And we do know also that Senna was fairly strict with the Williams team when it came to lack of performance on the Thursday afternoon. That was redressed very smartly indeed, And I suspect another dose of the same medicine on Saturday evening may well be hoping it's going to work a wonder for both Rothman Williams runners.
Well, there we see Ayrton Senna leaving his garage, and it's a fairly narrow pit lane, John, and there's a lot of cars in there, and with 2 or maybe 3 pit stops, well, it's going to be a very busy pit lane indeed. Gerhard Berger, the quickest Ferrari driver. Gerhard qualifying on the 3rd row in 5th position alongside Martin Brundle, and right in front of temporary teammate, we should say, Nicola Larini.
Well, all attention now back to Senna as he goes out for his exploratory lap, and we have to wait and see now whether this is going to be a run or whether he'll want to drop back in. Of course, Senna will have an option of running his race car or the spare car, and I suspect that that will be determined very early in this session.
Sparks flying. It's around 15 degrees Celsius at the moment, and temperature is about, or suspected to rise to, low 20s, and low 20s is a little cooler than it was during that qualifying session on Saturday afternoon. So maybe, John, we can see times somewhere around to 1:11s in this morning warm-up.
Well, I don't know what we're going to expect, but just watching Senna as he comes out onto this final Mike Knight corner and back into the pits on that out lap, I would say that the car, certainly in the corners that were troublesome on Saturday qualifying, that's the Revolver and Piper corner, compared to yesterday, the car looked a lot better. Now, of course, he wasn't quite as committed, and of course the importance of that out lap, nothing matching what he had to achieve or try to achieve on Saturday afternoon. So, but an indication to me that the team have been working, and that can be translated into a proper lap time. Then we're looking forward to, I think, a very, very exciting, very competitive Grand Prix.
The Benettons on the pace yet again. Jos Verstappen qualifying 10th for his 2nd Grand Prix. Verstappen who was 9th, but then Christian Fittipaldi took that place during the 2nd qualifying session, and Fittipaldi one of only 7 drivers to improve during the Saturday afternoon session. And while we look at the guy that's on his 64th pole position, John, there's 2 Simtecs in the race. Roland Ratzenberger qualifying for his 1st Grand Prix, and David Brabham both occupying the last row of the grid, but at least they're in.
And in fact, Simtech were very disappointed back 3 weeks ago in Brazil that Ratzenberger didn't make it into the Grand Prix. He had a lot of problems during that fraught weekend, but 2 Simtechs have made it, and the unfortunate losers are the 2 Pacifics.
Schumacher, who actually didn't go out on Saturday afternoon like the 2 McLaren. Schumacher did some laps very slow, and here we run with the victor of the Brazilian Grand Prix a couple of weeks ago. And this, John, is the point where both Williams drivers spun off yesterday.
And watching Schumacher, who is pushing quite hard, he's not having to work anything like as much as we were watching the Williams drivers in qualifying on Saturday afternoon. Through Revolver corner, the balance of that car and the grip level very much better, very much higher.
Well, and that's commitment he's showing there as well. Schumacher very quick, very early in this session, and there we just caught a glimpse of Williams again taking the track.
Well, Schumacher isn't sparing anything at all. He's right on the very edge.
Well, and he is fastest. So 1:13.744 so far. That is quite a long way off what we've seen in qualifying, but it's early in this session, and also there's probably a lot of fuel in that car.
One of the two Tyrrells looking a little bit smoky on the overrun, coming down to the end of the straight. So an eye on that one. But just watch Schumacher through the corner that was causing most problem for most people. The car looks great. I have to say, looks an awfully easy ride for Schumacher, and I'm assuming that Jos Verstappen is enjoying the same kind of comfort. And it's going to be, I think, that kind of performance, ease of driving, therefore ease of, well, then look, dives into the pits off the last corner, last minute decision into the pits. But it's that kind of comfort, not simply from the physical standpoint, but from the mechanical standpoint, that is going to also count significantly when this race starts in earnest.
There's Mark Blundell with the Tyrrell Yamaha. Mark, who improved on Saturday afternoon from a 1:13.013 to a 1:12.751. He was doing exactly the same time on Friday as teammate Ukyo Katayama, who is still on that 13.031. And there is Carl Wendlinger, currently 6th fastest. There we see the time, bottom right of your screen. And Carl, who was 6th in Brazil, is quite a long way behind teammate Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who's 11th. And Carl Wendlinger we find in 19th position, John.
An unenviable place to be, because the performance of that car is obviously much greater than the position it will have on the grid. And as is ever the case, from the red lights, or the green light as it is, in fact, down into the first corner, to be that far back in a competitive car, one has to be a little bit prudent and careful. The temptation, of course, is to go barreling down into it, trying to make up as many places as is possible, with the consequent dangers that the cars ahead of you are going to be slowing down while you're still with your right foot buried onto the throttle stops. And then it's a question of coming back to the pits and saying, well, they all slowed down too quickly.
Well, Damon Hill is currently fastest in this session. There we see Mika Häkkinen trying to improve on that 1:14.147 that currently makes him 4th. Michael Schumacher is up there, and also Nicola Larini, Gerhard Berger and Carl Wendlinger. Behind Mika Häkkinen here, John, we see the Ligiers running, and there should be an announcement next week whether the team is sold or who's bought the team, for that matter.
Well, certainly speculation is pretty rife, and the smart money does appear to be in the Flavio Briatore camp, but a number of people in the pit lane are not very anxious to see Mr. Briatore gain control of Ligier, and I think it hasn't been helped possibly by comments that were made before the season began, that if he did acquire the team, that it could easily, in part certainly, be transferred to England.
So the Peugeot engine, both cars in the top 6 here. Martin Brundle. And Martin John doing a very good job for the team.
Well, 6th quickest presently, 14.538. And I think that this Grand Prix has seen Martin, get his confidence and feel comfortable working in the very professional approach McLaren adopts to its Grand Prix racing. And when you drive for the McLaren team, it's not just simply a question of dropping in or dropping out. Well, there's a problem that we did anticipate about a lap and a half ago, and it's materialized in a very significant way. That's oil, water, and most other fluids around the back of the car, and that's Katayama's Tyrrell, and it's going to mean a major engine. Well, he's still trying to get it moving, finally deciding that even a V7 or whatever it might be.
Well, Oliver Panis, I think, has got caught out.
I think you're right.
Wouldn't be surprised if that is caused on the oil sprayed on the circuit by Ukyo Katayama.
Nothing like a nice liberal coating of oil and water to just waken up the boys on a Sunday morning, Allard.
And this is the inboard camera from Katayama. Remember, oh, there's Roland Ratzenberger.
Well, maybe the marshals in Japan here at Tanaka International are not quite aware that there was oil going down. It seems more than coincidence that immediately after Katayama's car blows up, well, there you see, just literally on the entrance to the corner, and you can see water pouring out from the side pod. So I suspect more than one Conrad has ventilated the V10 block.
There is Katayama. I don't know where he is at the moment, John. I mean, it seems that he's still on the circuit.
Slightly more purposeful look from Senna now, having decided which of his two cars he's opting for. Lots of sparks coming. I wonder, has Williams decided to, in an effort to gain a better balance, and that Ligier badly placed right just after the apex at hairpin bend, or hairpin corner as they call it. This car will not be, or in my opinion, not running with full tanks, which is 200 litres. It probably got something closer to 70 litres. But the amount of sparks coming down the straight indicate that one of the cures they've been looking for is get that thing lower to the ground. They are already pretty low indeed, so you're talking about millimetres at most, maybe even less than that. But that very small amount of change can bring significant results.
A lot of traffic, and I think, John, this is what we will see when the race is there. A lot of cars here on this circuit. It's not a very long circuit. It's 3.7 kilometers long, and only Monaco, I think, is shorter than the TI circuit. It's also not a very fast circuit, as we can see. Overtaking is going to be fairly difficult, and this is Heinz-Harald Frentzen. And I'm not sure whether he forgot to come into the pits or something, because he's going very slowly past the pits.
Well, Frentzen is deciding what he wants to do. He may just have decided to take a very gentle lap, but I must say that's not basically in the nature of Heinz-Harald Frentzen. He only knows one way to drive a Grand Prix car, and that's as fast as is possible, so maybe there is a problem.
Damon Hill is still fastest during this morning warm-up. We're going to take a short break here on Eurosport, and please join us after that for the last 13 minutes of the morning warm-up. Welcome back on Eurosport. Welcome back with Ayrton Senna, the man on pole position. We just saw a lot of sparks flying from that car, and John, they are adjusting the ride height a little bit.
Well, they're working at the push rods on the front of the chassis, and that can both affect ride height and spring rate. So Senna may well have been conscious. Certainly the team would know, because they would always check them underneath the car each time it comes back into the pits. But I would think that Senna's preoccupation right now is watching his monitor with precisely the same action that you're seeing at home, and that is Schumacher coming up to the end of the hairpin on another lap.
Well, John, Schumacher has done 4 or 5 laps consecutive now. Although it is a little cooler than it's probably going to be this afternoon, that'll give the team an indication on tyre wear and what they can expect.
Just what I was going to say, Suzuki, he's actually pulled over to let Schumacher through. But again, watching Schumacher pushing very hard, the car just looks lovely. I mean, it looks such a comfortable and predictable car to drive. And again, a major factor this afternoon, having that kind of confidence and performance in a car on a tight circuit like this, where, well, no one's admitting to any strategy right now. And running very, very wide again. That's confidence. You wouldn't be doing that in a car that you were afraid was going to bite you.
Schumacher getting closer to the fastest man this morning so far, Damon Hill, on the 1:37.44. And there's one thing all the drivers agree on, John, and that is that 83 laps around this circuit is going to be a very hard race indeed, physically.
The only salvation, I suspect, is that if you use your tyres too early, too soon, you're going to have a very little grip. And of course, when the grip drops away, all those loads that you have, they also go away. On the other hand, you're left with a difficult car to drive because it doesn't always follow, and locking up that right front and losing time consequently. So as you get an imbalance in the car, then the emphasis shifts away maybe from the physical side more to the mental side. So whichever way you look at it, it'll be a tough afternoon's work.
There we see Jos Verstappen in the other Benetton Ford. And he's following the Ferrari of Gerhard Berger. And that Ferrari looks pretty useful down the straight. Now Verstappen, John, was, well, certainly not the fastest. On Friday he was even the slowest car down the back straight, the fastest part of the circuit. So they are running a lot of downforce on that car.
I think the philosophy for Verstappen is, and in fact, the same as they had in Brazil. They're going to give him the maximum security that is possible. It may mean sacrificing a position. They want to get him to the finish of the race. They want to get him into the points. In my mind, if he is running at the end of the race, he ought to be in the points with a car like that.
Currently 17th fastest. Then he's probably only just started to do some laps, and he's keeping up with that Ferrari right in front of him, using all of the circuit and a little bit more. Well, there's a man who's used to using a little bit more. Well, Damon Hill, 12.9, then Carl Wendlinger right behind him, Michael Schumacher and Ayrton Senna, third and fourth fastest. Mika Häkkinen and Nicola Larini follow, but Larini already 1.3 seconds behind Damon Hill. Comas in 7th, Brundle in 8th, Morbidelli 9th. That is the situation.
You watch Mika Häkkinen, he does take some awful liberties in a race car. Again, like Schumacher, high level of confidence, total belief in his car, his team. Takes the car to the very, very edge of the circuit, and sometimes beyond.
Coming out of this corner, John, there's, I think everybody is, well, Gerhard, well done, a 1:13.653, but everybody is struggling for grip. It's sort of slightly uphill, and all the cars that have wheel spin, you see them slide around, and then going into that difficult left-hander that drops away from you.
Well, basically the best car is the Benetton of all we have seen so far over the 2 days we've been bringing you qualifying, the third day now with the morning warm-up, and that has been, in our view, the most consistent car. An interesting camera position on Berger's Ferrari. Now coming up into this very fast left and right. Now it's down into the hairpin. Martin Brundle reckons, given half a chance, you could slide underneath somebody there. I tell you what, in my mind, that's a very slim half chance.
I think going up to the only realistic overtaking point, which is at the end of this straight.
Yes, that's the case. Again, it's a part of the circuit. It's obvious. It's pretty easy to defend, and unless there's a massive speed difference, well, there you see somebody doing it correctly. So that is Aguri Suzuki passing David Brabham. Well, that's the ideal way to pass a slower car, or alternatively and preferably a competitive car. Makes your life a great deal easier. But if this was the race and those two cars were racing for position, I don't think David would be quite so generous as we saw him in this warm-up session.
Last car of this trio is Olivier Beretta in the LaRousse Ford. different color scheme this weekend. And if we understand it's for this weekend only, by the time we get back to Imola, they'll be green again. Ratzenberger, 25th fastest on a 1:17.6. Well, Roland, the only man who started at this circuit before, although it wasn't a saloon car. And that Simtek, John, it's an interesting car. It's got a different front suspension, and the team is very adamant it's the right way to go.
They would say that, wouldn't they, Allard? I mean, that's the natural thing to say, but it is unusual. The mounting for the bottom wishbone in the chassis is very high in relation to other cars, and where the chassis, where the wishbone attaches to the upright, it's virtually in the center of the hub line, and that's a pretty rare. I've never seen before. The only downside of that setup is that it's got to be built very much stronger than the conventional car. Look at Senna's Williams, for example, and the upper and lower wishbones on that Simtek look like something off the Severn Bridge.
Ayrton Senna,
that's the problem he's been having throughout the weekend, that very, very sudden and unpredictable back end. This is the corner where he had it in Saturday qualifying. It just steps out and all grip adhesion is lost.
Now, John, we're watching Larini going into the pits. That is a very narrow and slow pit entrance. And that's a very useful practice for Nicola Larini.
Well, somebody's waving around the back of the car. Looks like that wheel has not gone onto the locating dowels correctly. And Ferrari, of course, one of the two teams using the unique BBS wheels made in Germany. The forged wheels cost an absolute fortune, but the advantage is for a given amount of strength, they weigh considerably less than the normal magnesium wheel that is used on conventional Formula One design. So it is an advantage. Again, Benetton are the second team to exploit the technology that BBS have been developing, and I'm sure most teams will be queuing up for similar like wheels.
Well, we're looking at the places 7 to 12 and 13 through to 18th during this morning warm-up. Ayrton Senna has been fastest so far, not by a lot, only by a little bit, from teammate Damon Hill. And there we see Jos Verstappen through to Johnny Herbert in 24th, and Johnny not a very happy man indeed, while Pedro Lamy and Roland Ratzenberger bring up the rear of the field so far. But Ayrton Senna, then Damon Hill, Gerhard Berger in third, Carl Wendlinger, Michael Schumacher is fifth, and Mika Häkkinen sixth, Christian Fittipaldi seventh, and then Heinz Harald Frentzen. So Williams 1-2 with just under 2 minutes to go. John, would you assume that maybe Benetton would run a little bit more fuel?
I would be assuming Benetton have probably run the B compound tyre, in fact, because your teams have got the option. They made that choice at the beginning of the weekend, and if they used a set of Bs, they may want to find out just what that tyre is like on race morning. And I don't think we should read too much importance. Oh, and look at the understeer, that is appalling. And then of course when the front finally bites, the back end very lively indeed. And Larini's car setup does not look to me to be one that I would be fancying 83 laps around Tanaka International with.
There's the man that's currently fastest, Ayrton Senna, who spun away his chances for a victory in the Brazilian Grand Prix. Of course, his home Grand Prix in his hometown, Sao Paulo. A 1:12.872 is the time as it stands at the moment. Now, this is interesting. He's, I think, too far back to get a good tow from the Tyrrell Yamaha right in front of him. and let's see whether he can find a way past by the time he gets to the gearbox of it.
Car looks considerably better this morning through that very troublesome double left-hand corner. And Senna has backed off. Basically, he's decided that trying to challenge Katayama at this point is not worthwhile, and the session in effect is in fact over.
And Senna coming into the pits. His session is very definitely over. And that is where he will stop for a pit stop. The checkered flag is being waved. And John, a quick preview for the Grand Prix. It's going to be an interesting first couple of laps, I think.
I think it's going to be an interesting 83 laps, to be honest. It's a long, long race. If the teams really knew what their strategy is going to be, if they could really predict from previous experience where we know the track's going to improve or it's going to deteriorate, that's the kind of information that we would be wishing to give our viewers. But unfortunately, we're as in the dark as are the teams, and every lap is going to be really an adventure, a discovery. I suppose one has to feel that Schumacher, Senna, Damon Hill are the obvious choices for the podium. And as I said just a few moments ago, I'm not going to read too much into in the morning times, because I do think that with the choice of running a B or a C compound tyre, the options are quite large. And of course, if you run with a B compound tyre, while the lap time may not be there, you may well be able to, let's say, dispense with one additional pit stop. And with the slow entry into the pit lane and the possibilities of mistakes during a wheel change, we saw that Ferrari had a problem getting one of the rear wheels located and then getting the car in and out quickly. Those are the things you have to think about. And I'm quite sure Benetton are best placed right now to look at the option of a B compound tyre. I suspect that everybody else is going to go with C compound.
There's Heinz-Harald Frentzen in his Sauber Mercedes. 10th position, 1:14.148 for him. So 83 laps around the Tanaka International Circuit. 5:30 if you're on the continent, 4:30 if you're on in the UK. That is when we will be back for the Grand Prix, the second Grand Prix of the 1994 Formula 1 Grand Prix season. Well, Yukio Katayama, is he going to be the Japanese hero, or is it going to be Aguri Suzuki? I mean, that's a little honor to be fought between those two drivers.
Well, I think the dice is fairly loaded in the Katayama court. Of course, Aguri Suzuki having to jump in at the last moment to replace Eddie Irvine, who's serving out a 3-race ban. And in fact, he is probably in Japan, more likely Hong Kong at this moment.
Ayrton Senna was fastest in the morning. Is he going to be fastest this afternoon? We'll be back, and we hope you too. Bye for now.
The Formula One World Championship is brought to you on Eurosport by Ford, Formula One's most successful team. Hitachi. Elf Fuel, World Champion. Coca-Cola. And Goodyear.